There are many reasons that I'm utterly obsessed with the fantasy genre, some of which were mentioned in my last video on this topic. From the deepness of the escapism it creates, to the incredible characters that carry the stories and the universal themes that are just sublime, the fantasy genre for me is just superior to all other genres. But because fantasy is such a fine art, and it takes incredibly talented people to write it, and direct and act in these stories, it is very hard to create good fantasy stories, both written and live action. Subsequently, it is very easy to create incredibly awful fantasy stories that make true fans of the genre want to pull their hair out. And the first reason that fantasy media in its modern format has and will fail is through the process of self-inserting. And when I say self-inserting, I don't just mean creating a character who looks like the director or the producer or what have you. I mean a story in which the director's or producer's thoughts and ideas have been inserted to create a narrative in their ideology. Not only is this the most narcissistic form of storytelling, it is also the most stagnant. So much is lost creatively when a director or producer takes it upon themselves to tell the audience, this is how you should think or feel or believe about this story or this character. It becomes less about entertainment and making a sense of awe and wonder, and more about education and instruction. Entertainment and storytelling should remain as such and not become ideologies straight from the director's minds to the screen. One of the greatest examples of this not happening was, of course, Peter Jackson's The Lord of the Rings, where PJ himself was humble enough and self-aware enough to use words like this to describe the story he was trying to tell.
Well, we didn't want to put any of our own, certainly in terms of the thematic material, we didn't want to put any of our own baggage. I mean, we had no interest in putting our messages into this movie, but we thought that we should honor Tolkien by putting his messages into it.
This is the sort of attitude that all filmmakers should have when embarking on an epic fantasy story, and on any sort of film journey in general. There should be none of the personality quirks of the filmmaker in it. Instead, it should be made to be pure entertainment, pure cinema for the customer, and the chances that they will be lauded for it race to the top of the mountain. After all, the Jackson films amassed 17 Academy Awards between 3 films, and are still praised as some of the greatest films of all time, if not the greatest, even a quarter of a century after they were made. And yet we have filmmakers today whose entire essence is about creating a story in their image, inserting talking points like feminism and LGBTQ ideology where there never was, and spiting the fans when they voice concerns and passion for their favorite characters, and famously expressing little to no experience or love for the source material that doesn't fit with the message they are trying to send. With fantasy these days, the story has become a message and nothing more. Adapting fantasy is one of the most challenging things one can do as a filmmaker, because oftentimes the lore is so dense that one has to love it in order to have even a chance at doing it correctly. And instead, we have people like Jennifer Salke, the head of Amazon Studios, responsible for the disasters that were Rings of Power and Wheel of Time, saying things like this. Not only do these filmmakers express an utter lack of interest in anything to do with the mediums and worlds they are working in, but they are more concerned about its ability to be a vehicle for activism, which has become such a hated word lately. And the backlash for them turning these IPs into nothing more than a mouthpiece for their narcissism and narrow-mindedness has been canceled shows, declining viewing numbers, and the departure of high-profile actors from their roles. Fantasy has become a joke to the audience now, a meme and something to be mocked rather than something to be wondered at and held in awe like it should be. Creators have become obsessed with telling their stories, rather than the author's story, which was the story that fans and the audience fell in love with in the first place. It blows my mind that writers and execs would look at an established property with a huge fan base that a story is already beloved and think to themselves, this needs improving. It's not the way that I would tell it, or let me educate people on the correct way to showcase this classic tale. Not only is this completely delusional and arrogant, it's also cultural destruction. The complete lack of understanding for why these shows are so praised and cherished leads them to only see the praise and want to create something like it, but without all the problematic themes and values and roles that they view those authors had. And the minute classic stories that are fundamental pillars of pop culture begin to be changed to satisfy the whims and tendencies of small-minded, narrow people, well then, it's quite easy to see that pop culture is changing, and not for the better, and might never be the same again. Additionally, one of the hallmarks of fantasy storytelling and stories in general is the hero's journey, where the main character leaves their home and is subjected to pain and hardship on their journey to becoming the person that they are meant to be. They experience betrayal, suffering, heartache, loss, pain, and tragedy as they walk toward their journey's end. And by the time the story is done, not only are they the heroes that they were striving to be for so long, not only have they accomplished everything that they set out to do, but they are forever changed by their experiences for good or bad. Themes like power take a back seat to the ambitions of the characters and the larger goal of the world at large, and any ultimate consolidated form of power is often seen as an evil thing. The hero ultimately does not want power. They want freedom from the ultimate form of power, which is tyranny. They want personal autonomy and autonomy for their friends, family, neighbors, and the people of their world at large. It is what they fight for, and sometimes it is also what they may end up dying for. It's a simple, straightforward story that is also a classic because no matter what, people don't become bored of it and likely never will. The fantasy genre is famous for the telling of heroes' journeys and have often in the past told them very well. Stories of underdogs and people fighting against impossible odds are still the stuff of iconic stories. The tale of Jon Snow, Frodo, Aragorn, Rand, the Pevensey children, even Aladdin are all stories where the characters face an enormous amount of suffering and manage to succeed in the face of all odds. It is a classic story, a timeless story, and it's one that we don't often get anymore. Stories like this are seen as too boring, too tired, or even outdated. These days, people are more interested in the concepts of nihilism and moral ambiguity than in the hero's journey, because it's apparently too black and white for them. Or even more interestingly, maybe it's because the hero's journey has been primarily male-focused, and given Hollywood's interest in telling overtly female stories, no matter how ham-fisted they are, this would, of course, insult their sensibilities. Because of course telling the stories of men is problematic, because men have somehow become problematic. So all the stories that feature men in the prominent roles and prominently feature the hero's journey as their main storytelling theme have to be toned down. The men are given diminished roles as the new stories have to make way for everyone to feel included. But the problem with this is, the female stories that they try to write don't even feature a hero's journey at all, something they might be able to be forgiven for. If the female-focused stories had the same odds as the males, and were just as affected by the hero's journey as they were, that would be acceptable, as it's the very definition of equality. But instead, the females in these fantasy journeys start their stories at the middle or at the very end, where they are already excellent and possess all the tools that they need. Most of their journeys are somewhat backwards in a sense, because instead of the hero learning to become that way and training hard to hone their skills and powers and going through hardship, the stories have become about self-actualization. Realizing how wonderful they are and waiting for others to recognize it, and of course, always being right even when everyone around her believes her to be wrong. The most accurate representation of this new form of the hero's journey would be Hera from last year's War of the Rohirrim, a film I was initially looking forward to before the true nature of the story was revealed. Though she is not a sociopathic narcissist like Galadriel from Rings of Power, or even members of the Aes Sedai in Wheel of Time, Hera, a previously unnamed and virtually unknown character, because she was so unimportant to the author himself, completes her journey of self-actualization even amongst the death of her father and all of her brothers. The story accomplishes this by turning her father, Helm Hammerhand, into a bloodthirsty, short-sighted fool who nearly brought about the death of his kingdom and his entire line before Hera acts to save the kingdom. The story makes her out to be the most righteous, the most level-headed, the most worthy, and the most skilled. Most of the men in this story are either mad with rage or grief, or both, and cannot be relied upon to be sensible or trustworthy. As a result of this, the women have to pick up the slack, like Hera, and while Hera is not as insufferable as some of the other females who have been inserted into the primary role in the hero's journey, well, the hero's journey as Hollywood sees it, she is certainly the quintessential definition of everything that is wrong with the hero's journey now. Doing the right thing for the right reasons, because it is the right thing to do, has been replaced with a strange sort of power fantasy. Long demonstrations of how enlightened and actualized they are. Long sword fighting montages to demonstrate their power. Bonus points if it's actually against an opponent much bigger than they are, and they are the only ones that can take them down. The hero's journey doesn't exist anymore, and not just in its classic sense, because these characters aren't heroes. They exist as manifestations of what the writers would like to see in the world, the ultimate power fantasy that they wish they could be or think that they are. These characters are not aspirational like heroes often are. Instead, they are as far removed from a relatable hero as it is possible to be. And as the hero's journey is disappearing, so too are the morals that have always driven those heroes. Morals in fantasy have in fact become small and insignificant, rather than the driving force behind everything a fantasy hero says and does. Morality and the questions attached to it has always dominated fantasy filmmaking. Because oftentimes, the hero's journey will coincide with great suffering and strife and lead to existential questions about that suffering and his role in the universe. There will often be questions about death and war and the use of power that will cause the viewer to think deeply on those subjects. But in the end, the morality of the show or movie informs the actions of the character and makes us love them all the more. The characters in these modern fantasy shows and movies have no morality whatsoever. There is no form of good or any form of evil. It is all the same. And in fact, the highest form of morality in all these shows and movies is how much power one has. The amount of power within each character will infer their moral standing, and then they are the ones that we should be looking to as the objective moral good in the show. It isn't about their actions anymore and what they choose to do, but rather about the power that they wield against others and within themselves. The amounts of power that they have make them an aspirational standard, no matter if they use it for good or evil. This is literally a line that Lord Voldemort uses in Harry Potter, who is of course one of the preeminent figures of evil in fantasy literature. The heroes we are supposed to care about do not consider the lives that they ruin, human or otherwise, and mock those members of lower classes than them. They use their power to kill and destroy, and often we are supposed to see their revenge schemes and plans as indications of their righteousness, when they are the farthest thing from moral that it is possible to be. And as our heroes' morals are rapidly disappearing, so too is both our respect for them and, of course, the creator's respect for them. Character reverence when creating fantasy is something that cannot be overstated when it comes to making a good story. If actors and creatives are taking the time to learn about these characters, explore their motivations, analyze their goals, and get inside their heads, then the odds of the story execution being excellent skyrocket. The best example of this is possibly Viggo Mortensen from the Lord of the Rings trilogy. Doing all of these things demonstrates an immersiveness that most creatives these days have no interest in doing. The root cause of it, of course, is arrogance and the belief that any story they can tell is either better than the one that they are being asked to tell, or else the story is irrelevant in the face of its use as a platform to spread their message. Writers these days have no reverence for characters like Rand and Galadriel, Elrond, Gandalf, and Geralt. These characters are either problematic to them because they are men and need to be re-educated, or hidden, or else they are too weak and need to be given a role that was never theirs to play. The concept of method acting and getting into the minds of characters like this is all but dead. Understanding and respecting the way that they were written and thus them is completely gone, and is something that we will never see again unless there is a massive cultural shift within Hollywood. And the chances of that happening are about as slim as Frodo finding a way to toss the ring into Mount Doom without dying. Thanks so much for watching this video, guys. Be sure to let me know your thoughts on modern fantasy and its pitfalls down in the comments section below, and let the conversations begin. Until next time, everyone.